There is an impressive amount of racetracks in the real world, and when it comes to sim racing games, developers can make their own made up digital racetracks, add them in, meaning the options are quite endless. So what tracks should you get if you're looking for some new ones to add to your own catalog, or especially if you are a beginner? Today I'll be giving you 5 great options for racetracks that I think suit beginners really well, and I'll take these from the iRacing service just because they have one of the largest catalogs of racetracks out of all the sim racing games, but you'll find nearly all of these in other racing titles as well. Just before we jump into it, just so we're on par of what makes a racetrack hard, because everyone's going to have their own idea of what the most difficult racetrack is or why one is harder than another. There's 4 things that I like to look at. One is walls. So if a wall is right on the edge of a racetrack, such as you see in a lot of street circuits, the problem is if you have any accidents or any mishaps, you impact the wall, your race can be over very, very easily. Going into number 2 is room for error. While the wall next to the track has little room for error and also ties in this one quite well, this one I'm thinking of an example between like Red Bull Ring and Road America. So they're both open racetracks with a lot of sand and grass if you were to stuff up a corner and go off. So maybe not as difficult as saying as there's a brick wall right there or cement wall, but Red Bull Ring, if you do miss a corner, go too wide, make a mistake, generally you make it back onto the track pretty easily. Whereas other tracks like Road America, they share a lot of the same kind of feel, you know, the big sweeping corners. If you miss it though, chances are the accident's going to be greater. You're going to hit a wall or something like that. So number 2 is the room for error. Number 3 is how rough the circuit is or how much it rises and falls. Now I think that makes the up and down of a racetrack is what makes racetracks great in my opinion, but it does make racing harder because if the track's falling away from you, you can pinch tires easier, you know, it's harder to stop the car, you need to anticipate these things, and beginners might be really caught off guard when tracks rise and fall. Or going back to Belle Isle, if they're on like some cement racetrack, really rough and bumpy, it's super easy to have a tire lock and then you miss the corner completely. So roughness and rising and falling is number 3. Finally is how much is there to remember? If we think about the Nordschleife, I think one of the hardest things about that racetrack is just remembering all the corners and what's ahead, and if they look the same. You might be mistaken for what corner you're at or can't remember what gear you need to be at. So a shorter racetrack with less corners, in my eyes, is much easier to master than a long one or one that's tricky and you can't really remember off by heart exactly what corner you're up to unless you're well experienced at it. So with those things covered, let's jump into number 5. Starting off here, I think Okayama comes in as one of a great beginner racetracks, and you'll find that iRacing actually use it for the MX5 Cup series, which is built for beginners. Now what makes this track good is the ability to make these mistakes like I was talking about, even if the corner itself is quite challenging. So there's 2 that come to mind and that are quite hard with this track. The first one is number 2. It's a falling away left-hand turn, which is probably the most nasty of all the corners. Super easy to lose the rear end, and chances are there'll be quite an accident there. But there is a wall, you're kind of running along it. You don't normally contact it all the time unless you really had a big nasty crash. And the second one is this hairpin. Coming off one of the faster straights on the track, super easy to pinch a corner because it kind of does, you know, rise and fall a little bit. But even if you have the most monstrous lockup and miss this corner, which I've seen many MX-5s do, you're generally okay. You're a little bit dirty because you've been out in the bush, but you come back on the racetrack and continue on. So it's always a nice fun racetrack, nice close racing. Okayama, not one of the easiest, but I think nice enough to make this beginner top 5 list. Number 4, Red Bull Ring. Now there's not many corners to Red Bull Ring. The F1 cars do this in about a minute's time per lap. So it's a super fast racetrack. There's not many corners. While some of them can be tricky to get 100% right, and it's quite easy to get off tracks because you're pushing the limit at this track, it does quite well at teaching new drivers pretty like harshly about, you know, the braking when they go down. Turn 3 teaches some harsh lessons about braking down, but you have so much runoff room in all of these corners that while the pride of your mistake may be felt very heavily, the damage to the car is not normally too drastic. Now, there is a big draft train that appears on this track, so the racing can be very tight. Now, you can weigh in here that a lot of accidents happen on Red Bull Ring because the racing is in such a big draft train and people are dive bombing each other and things like that. But the particular racetrack itself, I think is quite a nice one. Next we have Watkins Glen, a super fast one here, with or without the bus stop. The bus stop is probably the most difficult part of this racetrack because you're coming into it so fast. It's a very nasty corner. You don't want to go too wide through there. That always ends in disaster unless you're a very experienced driver. But Watkins Glen itself doesn't really have anything that's super, troublesome to deal with. The bus stop in some of the layouts is removed, so it's just one long big straight into a big long right-hander. So any mistakes here could end in a mega spin, but generally you can be okay. And the corners that you do make mistakes on here are generally the slow. So Watkins Glen, always been a part of my catalogue. I got it long ago, and you'll find a lot of race series go there on iRacing. Number 2, one that I don't own that I actually have raced a lot on ACC, is Zolder. And I think it's a really great racetrack. I always have a lot of fun on it. It has some interesting corners and some fast ones as well, paired with a nice, really sharp couple chicanes there. Really groups are filled up. And there's nothing particularly super dangerous, I think, on this corner. You get a lot of, dirt on your tires if you go a little bit wide, but like our options back through walls, room for error, roughness, and number 4, how much to remember, it ticks those boxes all quite easily. There's nothing super hard to remember. You know what corner you're up to. There's no wall really nearby. The track doesn't go up and down so far, and it's quite a smooth racetrack. So all in all, I think comes in really well here in the top 5 list. And number 1 for racetracks that everyone probably knows about, but I think is a great one for beginners. Now you might think of turn 1 here and completely say, no, that's a terrible racetrack. It always ends in tragedy. But Monza only has your chicane for the first couple corners. You got your 2 sweepers around the back, and then Ascari and Parabolica. So while the racetrack itself is really fast and you don't really want a mistake here, but turn 1 has a runoff. The chicanes always have a nice runoff area. Ascari, you can have monstrous spins because you just lost the rear on the curb or whatever it is, but you can spin several times and end up back on the racetrack facing the right way and continue on, which I've done and I've seen done many times. So the track itself, everyone knows about. It's quite easy to remember. It's flat the whole way around. There's no rising and falling, so the braking points are always pretty straightforward, as long as you don't miss them completely like the rookies like to do. But I think Monza is one that everyone's going to have an easy time remembering. They're going to load up when they want to test cars or just do some hot laps because it's quite a fun track. It's nice to race on. And while turn 1 can be completely disastrous in many cases, I think the track itself, when we look at the 4 criteria that we looked at, is another nice one to add to your collection that everyone knows about. The Temple of Speed, and even having that legendary status, there's enough reason to add it into your beginner lineup tracks. So let me know what your beginner tracks are in the description below. I'll be happy to discuss with you, and even in future videos, if we look at 2023 tracks or something, the list might change a little bit after discussing with you guys. But thanks for watching. I will see you guys next time.